Thank you so much, everybody, for being here to help us with this happy occasion of launching Penny Gill's new book, her big book, The Radiant Heart of the Cosmos, my name is Jennifer Browdy, and I have been working with Penny for a few years now, but we were just commenting before the session began that this book came together actually fairly quickly once Penny decided she was going to do it. It came. It took on a life of its own, and I think that's maybe partly due to the teachers who have been working with Penny to bring this wisdom to the world. So it's been a real honor for me to be part of that process. And I wanted to just sort of remember how I got involved with Penny, which was through a friend of mine, Diane, who handed me the first book, What in the World is Going On, and said, you have to read this. So I read it, and then I read it again, and then I read it again. And after about a year of rereading it, I said, I have to reach out to this mysterious Penny Gill. Who is this person? So I emailed Penny, and from then we started working together. And it was interesting. I really think that Manjushri made that connection because Penny had been getting the message that she should put more personal stuff into her writing, into her next book. And that's my specialty, is working with authors on memoir and sort of coaxing the personal story out. So it was really a pleasure to work with Penny and keep going back to the personal story in the larger context of the compassion teachings, which is what this book is about. So, Penny, I don't know how many of you have already read the book, but you'll find in the book that there is the story of a little bit about Penny's childhood, a little bit about her educational journey all the way to the PhD at Yale, and then 30 years in the mines of academe as professor and dean at Mount Holyoke College. And then there was this one day when suddenly she heard the voice of Manjushri begging to disagree with her internal monologue, and that changed everything, right? And so that is what we're here to to hear more about today. So Penny, we're going to turn it over to you, and we thought we would start with just a little bit about how this book came to be from your point of view.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. I should tell everybody else that Jennifer was my doula, and she insisted on getting me to do more memoir, and I didn't want to do that. And you'll be able to read some of that story. That was an epic battle, truly. That's in the first part of Radiant Heart, and I'm so grateful that she insisted, but it was truly an epic battle. And I'm guessing the next time I sit down to write something, there will be even more. There will be even more memoir in it, because as an old classroom teacher, I really do know that that's a way to help make a pretty abstract kind of theoretical argument totally accessible to somebody who's trying to grasp it. And I did it every day in my Mount Holyoke classroom. So it enriches it, but it made it more complex to try to create a single book out of it. So these teachings came, I don't know, and in this 2009, 10, 11, around there. And when I would get a series of teachings, I would just take them down and put them away. There's a substantial hunk of this stuff around the house still, and in my Mac and other places that I haven't explored. But there was this pile called the Compassion Teachings. And What in the World is called the Wisdom Teachings, and it's a straight shot on what's going on in the world and the gigantic intervention of the realm we don't often admit is there, that Manjushri called the shower of spirit. And so this is another big focus that was on wisdom, on the construction of fear, and how fear has actually made our world. Our responses to fear has made our world. But to save our world, and to save our lives, wisdom is important, and compassion is essential. And the modernity, the modern world, has so silenced and shut down what I tend to call the divine feminine, or the sacred feminine, or something like that, but that profound, creative, life-nourishing energy of the universe. And it seemed really important. The teachers were asking me to do something with this bundle of teachings. And it seemed really important, given what was happening in the world in the last 5 years, that I zero in on that. I put a couple of other projects aside, which I thought could easily wait. So that's how we got started. And so I had a core of teachings from both Manjushri and Kuan Yin about compassion, and then kind of used that as a centerpiece and worked around it. I'm going to tell you more about the arc of the argument of the whole book as we go along this afternoon. But that's how we got going. And talk about the perfect COVID project. Sitting in my little house, and right 20 feet from Lake Superior, and the world's most beautiful island, Madeline Island, and really a very solitary life. And sometimes not having the ferry, sometimes not having the ice road. It was a really good project to keep sane and struggle and wrestle with some of these complicated ideas. So that's how I spent the last year. Excuse me. So this is a book. If you're not sad, if you're not scared, if you're not worried about the world, if you're not grieving a loss, if you don't feel like the world is wildly out of control and that all kinds of things that were stable are no longer stable, you don't need this book. But if you're sad, if you're lonely, if you're confused, if you're grieving, if you're terrified of the rate of change, if you're terrified of the focus on greed and arrogance and violence, then this is one place to start. And my purpose with the book was to just put some tools in your knapsack that you could use to begin to start some serious self-healing, to start yourself or augment yourself on your own path of healing. Because I am totally convinced that the only way we can really create a new world out of the catastrophic destruction that we're watching is by healing ourselves, so our perceptions are clear, so we aren't projecting crud into the world, so that we can actually recognize our intense connection and dependence on every other species. And to do those things, we need to heal our hearts. So this is a book with a whole bunch of ideas about how to slowly dissolve all the barriers that are around your heart, which block most of us from that flow of compassion, that flow of love that is just streaming towards us. And if it comes too hard and too fast, we shut down. And we can't afford to do that. And not every human being needs to get this in place before we move ahead. Actually, a small number can start to move this huge ocean liner around. But we need people with more open hearts, more open to compassion, more open to receiving compassion, so that we can vision what kind of community we really want to live in and that we want to hand down to the next generations. So that's my task. I'm 78. I'm hoping for good health because there is a ton of work to do. Helping people take these first steps. Once you're launched, you're fine. And there's enough suggestions in Radiant Heart to keep you going for a while. In fact, and then your own teachers will take over. Your own unconscious archetypal world, if you want a non-spooky version. They will lead you. You don't need me. You only need to get that first couple of steps, and then your own spirit takes over. And that's so profoundly exciting and reassuring, because then you know stuff, and you can trust that the advice you're getting from your teacher is tailor-made, perfectly timed, perfectly shaped to help you take the next step. You only have to take the next step. Don't think about the whole big thing or you'll get over it. So this book is for anybody who is full of heartache. This book is for anyone who can't quite surrender to the religious tradition that you grew up in, or you have, and it's no longer adequate for an incredibly complex postmodern moment. And it's a book for people who have been snacking in other traditions, because I am a great believer in that, if that's what you need to do. And you'll see a lot of evidence of me drawing on Jung, drawing on Christian monasticism, drawing on Buddhist meditation. I love the Hebrew Bible. I'm not an omnivore in terms of spirituality. Every tradition has something to teach me, and no tradition has a lock on the truth. So that's where we are. So where should we go from here, Jennifer?
Well, we just got a request. Is there a way to turn up, I think it's turn up your microphone? Turn up your volume? I don't know.
I can plug in my ears and see if that helps.
Yeah, that might help.
I have an aging voice, you guys.
Yeah, let's have to, but, and also maybe, keep yourself a little bit close. I think those earphones will help.
Yep, they usually do.
Yeah, well, there's Dari. I think, everyone's always curious to know more about your relationship with the teachers. And I think it's been really profound for me to hear you say over and over that everybody has this relationship with teachers with a capital T who are guiding us. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about how to become more aware of them, more in touch with them, or just your own experience with that.
Well, I think everybody has the potential to be in touch and in relationship with a guide. I really do believe that. I think we are wired for that, neurologically wired for that as a species. Some people's lives may not make it easy to do that, but I always get this question, and what I usually say is basically, shut up. Basically, is to sit quietly, light a candle, do the things that help you to kind of calm down and open all your orifices to some possibility that you can't name. Be wide open to outcome. I have to do mine with a journal and a pencil. Um, it's almost entirely written for me. Other people have other ways of doing it, of receiving information through images. You know, they're painters or they're photographers, and there's huge teaching in images. Some people actually can hear it, as in audially, and I think if your heart and mind are open and you can put all your preconceptions aside, far aside, and you can keep yourself quiet, something will happen. That's about the most I can say. I was rudely interrupted by each of them, and they clearly wanted to work. Each of them clearly wanted to work with me, and the stories of each of those are in the book, so you can find those there. The relation, it's taken. You know, I'm an academic. I'm an intellectual. I'm a thinker. My entire life is above my chin. And that's been a huge struggle to calm down that old materialist thinker in me that says, come on, Penny, get over it. To say nothing of the environments I've been in, which were hostile or mocking or whatever. This is not an easy thing to do in the middle of you know, a very marvelous college or university. So there's that, and if you can find fellow travelers to share things with, that's really, really great. That's been one of the huge joys of publishing What in the World, was that I found a community of people who loved thinking about this and loved being open to it. I was the one often dragging my feet, and and so there was that pull between, without any question in my mind, I was getting whole paragraphs that I never once could have thought of myself. I know what I can think and what I know. And I was just getting page after page after page after stuff of, you know, forgive me, but holy shit, this stuff is amazing. I could not think this. So that was the positive argument. And the negative argument was, so how do I persuade anybody that there is this gigantic reality that's much bigger and much more powerful than what we think of as everyday conventional reality? So I've moved quite a bit, and I still have that kind of sandpapery relationship with this business. So those are the teachers. None of this would have happened. I'm sure none of this would have happened without the teachers providing these gigantically creative and complex views of reality and the scope of human history. So, and my head just loves stuff like that. That's how I got enticed into thinking along with them. There's a pretty big piece of that in the middle of the book from Manjushri, where I think my favorite essay of all time is one called Noah's Wife. And Manjushri gave it to me decades ago, just kind of a freestanding download. And he says, so we don't know what Noah's wife would have done, but we do know she would not have just jumped on the boat and left almost everybody behind. She would have resisted God's demand, and she would have organized the community somehow to do something else. And that's how he initiates the conversation about gender and male power, patriarchal power. And then from there, he moves to a huge set of observations about how that initial distinction between boys and girls becomes the lens through which we have organized our societies and our culture and our religious practices and everything. And the price of that, well, the gift of that has been science. and airplanes and these damn computers and all of good health care, all these things. But the price of it has been that we've lost our relationships with our hearts, with the feminine, and with the flow of compassion and nurturance and care in the universe. And so he's the one who prompted me to try to address this. So in the middle of the book, there's this kind of, I don't know, 30 or 40 pages of a pretty complex argument about the origins of gender and its implications, and how the suppression of the feminine is related to much of our suffering. And so to move backwards through that argument, we have to restore our ability to feel, to restore our heart's ability to function, remove those layers that obscure and suppress and silence our heart. And then that gives us access to our own heart center, which in some tradition is called soul or spirit or your most vital core. It doesn't matter what you're calling it, but you know what I'm talking about. And that's a portal into the radiant heart of the universe, which is this flow of creative feminine energy, of imaginative creativity, of huge freedom. And so this book is how to help you start on the spiral path to engage in that process. So the third part of the book is a bunch of short essays. I've written some, Manjushri has written some, Kuan Yin has written some, with the first things that'll be puzzling to you at some point. So dreams, projections, shadow work, what gets you going initially, how to agree to walking on the path, agreeing to the process of transformation. That turns out to be hard. At some point they get you hooked, but until they do, it's really tempting to say, this is way too much. I will do this in another lifetime, thank you. But this is a really good lifetime. You have access to teachers, you have access to just a flood of information from other religious traditions. That you're able to join us in this kind of event means you are already living a very privileged life. So, this is a good moment. Go for it.
Well, I have heard you complain about how hard it is and how hard you are sometimes.
You sure have.
Yeah. So I'm pretty well aware that it's not a walk in the park to do this, but I think there's a real calling in a sense that it's not just about personal work, individual work, but it's about what you can do to heal the world by healing yourself, right? So there's a real element of service to it that I feel from you.
And I think that's essential, because otherwise it starts to leak into a lot of ego stuff.
Right.
And that has to be, you can't live without an ego, but it's nice when ego isn't in charge of everything. And ego really resists having its wings clipped. And there are multiple ways to do that, but for me at least, the best one, the sharpest tool for calming down an ego position is that almost everything I learn through my own experience, I'm kind of experimenting on myself, that everything I've learned becomes useful to somebody else in a minute. It's right away available to someone else's position, not even, just in passing, having a glass of wine with somebody, not counting the bigger frame, which would be the Bodhisattva path. Many of you have probably heard about that. And that's the vow that Buddhists make to keep what- to keep taking on more lives. In other words, to agree to reincarnation over and over again in order to more extensively remove the suffering of more beings. And there's a quite extraordinary vow, prayer that the Dalai Lama and most of the Himalayan South Asian Buddhists say every day, he does, about promising to do this, quote unquote, as long as space endures. So that's a fairly big view. And if you really adopt the notion of reincarnation as Buddhists do, they talk about eons of millions of light years. They've got a very wide view of time and space.
Mhm.
But the job is to reduce and reduce and reduce the suffering of all beings. And Buddhists now are starting to understand the implications of that for protecting the earth, for protecting species, protecting climate, doing all of those things as another form of Bodhisattva work. That's extremely promising, extremely promising.
Yeah, I'm hearing about green Buddhism now,
Yeah,
green
exactly.
Tara work.
Yep, exactly.
Um,
The
So-
Radiant Heart is being published by Jennifer's Press, and the name of the press is Green Fire Press.
Yeah.
No, fabulous name.
Right. I've got the green fire in the forest behind me.
Yeah.
Well, I think the heartache that brought me to the first book was really about the environment and the climate crisis.
Mhm.
Of course, it's just gotten worse since then in
Yeah.
terms of happening. But your approach is I don't know if I want to call it hopeful, but it's positive. It's like there is something we can do, and it starts in our own hearts.
Yeah.
And anybody can do it, you know. I think that's
And
very encouraging.
And I think I am hopeful. I'm not always optimistic. I'm kind of usually not. But the level of destruction, I've really been persuaded of this in the last 6 or 8 years. The level of destruction going on in the world right now, to say nothing of the United States, the destruction of long practices of civility and decency, the destruction of institutionals, the destruction of the rule of law. I mean, I'm an old political scientist, so I think about these things. But those are foundational. That's how people live together and share a space. And to watch them so seriously undermined is really terrifying to me. It really is scary. And this, however, it's, incremental change is very hard to make happen. And we're watching the problem of so many incremental changes being wound backwards in the United States. So we need a more scathing vision, a sharper vision about what we really want. And I'm guessing that begins on the grassroots level, that we do this in our community and our neighborhood. And because of how that changes relationships with people, and that's what has to happen. So that, to me, that's why I'm totally persuaded that if we can heal our hearts, if we can lessen our own load of suffering, and we know that automatically ripples out into our immediate environment and then continues. I think that's pretty hopeful, Jennifer.
It is hopeful.
But it's
Yeah,
a big view, and it requires it requires reincarnation to be realized for sure.
You mean more than one lifetime? Is that what you mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. So that the understanding and awareness aggregates over and over again. I mean, you don't have to look very far in your own life to see that there are some very, very marvelous old souls. Probably everybody who's here is an old soul, and some very raw, crashing around adolescent souls. And we can just hope that they come around again soon.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of reincarnation changes the relationship or the way we think about death a bit. And death is one of those big fears that Jushri says we have to relax about, right? So I think that may be one of the important things that we are needing to do now, is sort of come to terms with death. Yeah.
Well, the materialist ideology that we're all soaked in has absolutely not one single sentence that's useful about death and dying. Not one.
Can you say more about that?
It's easy to do better than that. And it's not a surprise that materialist worldview doesn't bring out our best selves, because the best self doesn't get any airtime, doesn't get to shape things the way it always has in traditional society.
So bringing a spiritual understanding that is not weighed down necessarily by religious tradition.
Well, just maybe more creative, more open-ended, more I mean, there are parts, you think of all the big major religious traditions in the world, the big 5 or 6. Each one of those has dramatically creative, innovative, reformist wings. Just need to listen more to them and not the old, rule bowing, nail biting crowd in each of those traditions. It's clearly personality, it's not the tradition. So what else should we talk about? What else should we talk about?
Yeah, I think are there other points in the book that you wanted to make sure to mention?
Well, yeah, it's not a book that you start on page 1 and go to 220. It's not a book to read. You can read it that way if you want, but you don't have to. You can look. There's a fairly specific, detailed table of contents on purpose, so you can be having such an experience and really need a little support, and you can probably find it mentioned in the table of contents. So start there. So there's virtually nothing linear in the book at all. First of all, linear thinking doesn't get you very far, but so that's one thing. And there's a strong appreciation of metaphor and image, and that's just how I think. But I think it really, really helps you to claim your own path, its own meaning, its own significance, so that you can begin to hear and see what the shape of your path is. I've never met 2 people whose paths are the same. Never. And it's a magnificent reminder of the particularity and uniqueness of each human being, even though at a deeper level, at a psychological level, certainly, and certainly at the level of soul, we are intimately connected. And I love that complexity, that it's slightly dissonant, between, well, this is just my own weird collection of things because of the family I grew up in and where I did third grade, and all that stuff that's particular. And yet I can meet somebody who has a completely different set of particularities and we connect like that. That tells me that there's a lot more going on in a human being than meets the eye. And one of the things that I've so appreciated about discovering my own path has been the juice of it, the juiciness, the surprises, the fun, the adventure, the moments of, I'll be damned, look at this, look at what just happened, the synchronicities. I was having a thought this morning and I was rushing. I've got clipboards all over the house. And I was looking for something and there was something I'd forgotten I'd written in February. And it was exactly what I needed to understand the dream I had last night. Now go figure how that happens. I don't know how that happens. But there are thousands of pages of paper around the house. And I was sent to the 3 pages I needed and hadn't remembered to even look for. That's what I mean. Those kinds of things start to happen. And it's so entertaining. There's so much energy in the process. And it's deeply healing. Each little piece of crud that you're able to pull up out of your shadow and start to dissolve comes with a fistful of energy that has been spent keeping it out of view. So you get bigger and bigger, you claim more and more freedom, other people's opinions become less and less interesting, and you're much more able to speak your own voice without being aggressive and combative and irritating. It's just that this is your truth, and because it's your truth, somebody else can have another truth. Well, that's interesting. Now we have 2 truths. That's not the end of the world. That's the beginning of community. So there are some bad days. And they're in the book, there's a whole essay on the uses of despair. There's certainly despair. But that's part of what we're carrying in our bodies. And that too needs to be brought up to the surface and dealt with compassionately. So I just want to welcome you. I just want to welcome you.
Yeah, I think this, it's taken you many years to get to this point of sort of joyful freedom around speaking your voice. And I think part of my hope for the book is that it will speed up that process for some of the younger people coming along behind us who really need to figure this all out quickly, because there is a sense of urgency right now, although it may be manufactured, but I do feel it to some degree.
When I was arguing with Manjushri about a year ago about whether I was going to tell any of my own story or not, Jennifer had really good help. And I was saying no and blah, 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 blah. And he said, so when you were 30, if somebody had handed you a book that described this process, would that have made a difference? And what would you have given to have it? And I was done. So I have written the book I wish I had had.
Yes. And that's what's really very exciting for me about it, is as we launch it, as we send it out to the world to see, where it's going to land. I feel like it's a seed that's winging out into the world, and we'll see where it lands and what it does.
And the best way for it to go out into the world, I know we have to do social media and all that stuff, but the best way for the book to move is by a person who finds it useful or interesting or juicy and hands it to a good friend. And that's how What in the World went out into the world, and quite successfully, I might say. But it was friend to friend. So I would bow in gratitude if you like it, if it's useful, if it's full of underlines, especially. Give it to a friend.